Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to go over Norsca. This is the beginner build, as always, here that we're going to be talking about. And yeah, so this one is going to be a little bit unusual. You can already see some of the choices are maybe not what you would expect. So I'm going to go in to explain why each one of these, why I'm recommending specifically each one of these, and then we'll go into it. So for the lore choice, almost always in competitive play, you see Wulfric. There's a reason for this. Wulfric on his horse with Seafang. Let's say that you bring the minimum kit, 1350. Basically, you get 3 free spells that are reasonably good, like a wind spell. However, Wulfric has pretty low armor piercing damage. He's a good fighter, but he has pretty low health. So the thing about Wulfric is that he dies. He dies frequently. He's not like one of the top level duelists. He has good stats, and his stats seem to suggest that he would do better than he does. But he's actually pretty underwhelming. So instead of recommending Wulfric, because I want you to be able to keep your lords alive, I'm actually going to recommend that you bring Throg. Throg is primarily an anti-large armor-piercing character, so humongous anti-large damage, coming in at 68 melee attack, and with Frostbite. Throg's the big reason that I'm recommending Throg. He's a little bit more expensive than Wulfric and a little bit more niche, but he has a big HP pool and he's got regeneration. So that combination makes him a lot less likely to just fall over and die when a stiff wind hits him. So you can bring him with the Copious Vomit. It's an okay breath attack. It's not amazing, but it gets some damage. Fight or Die, which is always good for buffing the troops, especially the leadership aspect around you, and the Wintertooth Crown, again, another like leadership buff. So Throg is like primarily an anti-large duelist, but he's a reasonably good duelist against other lords because of his armor piercing damage. So next, I'm actually going to change up. In the past, the magic that I've recommended you use is I've recommended you use metal casting. In this specific case, I'm actually going to recommend that you use death. Lore of Magic is the hardest to recommend for just one build for everything, um, because it's you want to be tailoring your magic choice to what your opponent's bringing. Like if your opponent is bringing a lot of unarmored stuff, you're bringing fire. If they're bringing a blob, you want to bring Final Transmutation. The thing that the death magic does is that it's very just one size fits all. You can cast Spirit Leech on any lord or single entity, and it does reasonably good damage. It's slow. Definitely don't overcast it because it's a lot more expensive. But with the Life Leeching passive, this spell becomes pretty cheap. Comes 8 minus 2.5, so 5.5 Spirit Leech is very good. And then Buna is the like one size fits all. You can cast this on expensive cav, you can cast it on a infantry, and it just does a lot of damage to expensive things. So the only thing that you don't really want to cast Buna on is a lord, and you don't want to cast it on a monstrous infantry. So it says strong versus 25 units or above. That means each person less than that, entities less than that, you'll lose a little bit of efficiency. So yeah, that's the Lord and the. Now we're gonna go to the infantry core. So I'm gonna recommend that you bring 3 Marauder champions. This is just a generalist, like a tanky fighter. So they look kind of similar to Chaos Warriors. They have a similar stat line, like high melee defense, medium melee attack, but good armor, shields, and good weapon strength. And they have the rage mechanic. So a lot of the units have rage, but it adds melee attack and it adds physical resistance. So this is like a nice little buff that builds up over time. So Marauder Champions very good at holding the front lines. A lot of times they'll win the front line engagements if they just manage to get into enemy infantry. I'm gonna recommend you bring some Marauders. These things are like, let's compare them to Clan Rats, for example. Higher leadership, higher melee attack, higher melee defense, weapon strength, but a good price point. So they kind of just their bodies. I think there's no real way of getting around that. Saying that their bodies, they just go there, and they, if they can get on weak things, that they do well. Otherwise, they just sort of will hold points and help you spread out. So the next unit that we want to talk about is these Marauder Hunter Javelins. They are primarily a anti-large missile unit. So they have very high bonus versus large. So 31 is already high for missile strength, but then with 15 extra bonus versus large, you want to be shooting these things at large things. So it's almost always good to bring one or two, maybe even more, but I'm just going to recommend that you start with one and try to keep this alive, see if it can shoot at large things the whole time. Now, my next recommendation is that I'm going to recommend that you bring the Marauder Horseman, Horsemaster, sorry. This is because Marauder Horsemasters have a pretty high missile strength, but they also have reasonably good leadership, fast, decent melee attack with decent charge bonus. So they're kind of a step up from the cheap one, the 551. Probably most of the times the 551 is cheaper and more cost effective, but in terms of keeping it alive, again, this one is probably the winner. Actually had a little extra gold left over, so I'm gonna recommend that you bring let's just bring Foe Seeker on Throg. The vigor will keep him hitting harder for longer. So yeah, the rest of the army, we're gonna go into I'm actually gonna recommend that you bring a throwing axe. The throwing axe has the high armor piercing. So basically these two units, they can just sit on lords or expensive things and they'll probably pay for themselves. But this one definitely is capturing the points at the beginning. And then this one can help if you want it to. But it also is just, it's nice to have this because, like, let's say that your opponent shows up with a Shredder of Lestria. This thing will do so much damage to the Shredder because it has primarily armor piercing damage. So that's really useful tool to have in your back pocket for at least just one. Now, I'm going to just say one more of the Marauder champions. I want you to be winning your frontline fights with your infantry. So want to make sure that you have good quality infantry. Then I'm going to recommend that you bring the Beast of Tashnar. The Beast of Tashnar has reasonably high bonus versus large and frenzy with really high missile resistance. Actually, I never really noticed it was that high. Basically, it does a ton of damage if it's not taking the charge. So that's the critical part. You don't want it to be getting charged because there's very low armor and it's small. So you can charge it against like an enemy caster. If their like light cav is not paying attention, this thing will do so much damage. Then kind of your like midline mobility are the Ice Wolves. Ice Wolves are they're just kind of like there are a lot of almost monstrous cavalry things like this that are relatively high weapon strength. They have frostbite, which is pretty cool. But basically, you can just imagine them as like the light cav of Norsca. So they're pretty useful to have. It's always good to have some of them. Super fast, can get to points, etc. Now, I'm gonna recommend you bring an Ice Troll. So Ice Trolls they have regeneration, but they have really low leadership. So I'm a little hesitant to recommend the Ice Trolls, but they're very useful because you throw them into melee. They can kill, like, let's say that your Marauder champions are going up against Slanesh warriors or something. That's something that will beat them in melee. Then you throw in the Ice Trolls, and they'll do a lot of armor-piercing damage. And so they're really good at killing armored infantry. And sometimes it's nice to have them as just mass to stop your opponent from charging you. Speaking of that, I'm going to recommend that you bring, I think, 2 armored skin wolves and 1 regular skin wolf. So this is your monstrous infantry. These are your like main anti-large. So they have pretty good bonus versus large values. They have regeneration and frenzy. So these things are very good at like fighting cav. They don't have great armor piercing damage, so they're not like they don't do everything for you, but they're relatively good at fighting armored things. Whenever you have an armored thing, you can just throw them in. I'm mostly recommending the skin wolves the armored skin wolves, because I think the tankiness will reward you in the end. You'll be glad that you took the ones with the armor. They'll survive a lot more. So all four of these low leadership, they tend to break, but because they have regeneration, sometimes you want them to break because they break, they run away, they heal, they come back. So that's a nice addition. Now imagine you're in that scenario that I was just describing, that the like you show up with this army and your opponent shows up with like a bunch of Slanesh warriors. Like, how are you going to deal with being out infantryed? Well, I'm going to recommend that you bring a Mammoth. This one does have Rampage. So if it gets low, it can Rampage, which is a little annoying. However, what it's very good at is killing super armored infantry. So your opponent shows up with like a Chosen. That's when you want to start thinking about, oh, I need to summon my Mammoth. My Mammoth is a great answer for Chosen. So very good armor piercing single entity. If you're charging it in, it'll do a lot of damage. They're not the strongest as far as monsters go, but they fill like a very important niche of, like, if you show up with Marauder champions and your opponent shows up with even stronger Marauder champions, you can bring the Mammoth. Yeah, so that's the recommendation for this army. How you play it: the horse masters are going to go summon or go capture a point while you move up with your army. Usually with this army, you're going to be the aggressive one. You want to surround your opponent and attack them from multiple sides, looking for spirit leeches at the beginning and fate up Yunas. And then depending on what your opponent brings, like if your opponent has kind of a low quality front line, you can summon another Marauder champion. If they have a lot of large things, you're summoning skin wolves. If they've out armored you, you're going to bring the ice trolls and the mammoths. And if they have like a Shredder of Lustria, something very high armor, you're going to summon this throwing axes. Then in the mid game, you're going to be summoning these mobility pieces as well as the skin wolves. You can also think of skin wolves as mobility because they're pretty fast. And then that's how you're going to control the battlefield. So Norsca, really great army, really interesting dynamics, and they're very fun to play. So highly recommend trying them out. And yeah, thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.